All right, Simran, I'm going to have you stand by because we have ASHWIN Parekh, who is partner at ASHWIN Parekh Advisory, on the phone with us. Mr. Parekh, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. We're talking about the RBI's final guidelines here on NBFCs. And, the first and most important part is the capital adequacy ratio that will be, through a phased manner, increased to 10% from the 7.5% it is right now. What do you think this is going to mean for businesses of, the NBFCs? Because, of course, it is phased, so it's going to be phased like Simran told us. But tell us what the impact will be for the businesses right now.
Yeah, see, there are two parts to it. If we do find that NBFCs have a meaningful role to play in the economy, particularly if they have to really go out to the smaller markets and create, some kind of a loan environment, let's say to those borrowers who are not availing the facility from the banking system, then I suppose it's a little harsh, but since it's to be done in a phased manner, they can plan their capital. I was doing a quick evaluation when the guidelines were coming out. Now, in the normal course, an NBFC, if it plows back its profits, for the next 3 years, then it may be able to really bring up the capital requirement from 7.5% to 10%, just about marginally. They may have to look at some external source to do that, but in terms of equity from other sources. But from the normal course, from the portfolio itself, they may be able to plow back and keep it in the books. So to that extent, it's a welcome move, I would say.
Mr. Parekh, I have one concern here, and in all fairness, it was not mentioned in any of the draft guidelines either, and that's the base rate system. Now, while banks have to follow the base rate system on all mortgage or home loans, there's no requirement at all for NBFCs to do the same. Do you think there's something amiss there in the industry right now?
No, see, basically, the whole concept of base rate, which was moved away from the original PLR kind of a regime, was more to link the rate that the bank establishes at which the borrowers are offered funds, to a level where it meets with the costing of that, the cost of funds and the overhead, a certain element of margin. Now, that's the base rate as far as the banking system is concerned. Once that gets established, for the NBFCs, basically the same base rate concept, plus, take the risk associated with the portfolio, and also plus the acquisition cost of going into smaller markets can become a good benchmark. Independently, we do not have, with the exception of 3 or 4 large NBFCs who are capable of establishing their own base rate and working in the market at those base rates. So to that extent, I would say the banking system will work in a different manner. The banking system will set out the rates in the marketplace, and then the NBFCs will have to work on that.
Hi, Mr. Parekh. Simran here. So just wanted to ask you one question on the NPA front. Well, they have tightened the norms as far as the NPA recognition is concerned. Remember, we were discussing about it a little earlier. You had said that is one particular point that's the most important one. So just wanted to get your view on this particular aspect. Do you think that it will impact the NBFCs in a certain way? And though it's in a phased manner, how much of an impact could we see then on their provisions and in return on their profits?
Yeah. See, we go back to the Usha Turat committee report, and then thereafter the government report, which was in response, to the working group's recommendations. Now, see, the NBFC lending activity is normally, if we accept the fact that they go to smaller markets where the economic income generation may be irregular. To that extent, you have to recognize the fact that the borrowers who may also have the intent to repay to the NBFC sector may not be able to do so the way the banking system works. That is, within 90 days, if you recognize, then there is a substantial behavioral issue. There is enough evidence available with, the NBFC association and the NBFC organizations to establish that if it was kept at 180 days, the borrower will still come forward and repay. Now what will happen is if you establish 90 days of recognition period, of threshold period, then the NBFC will say, look, now I'm already declared as an NPA, and therefore, I'm getting into a recovery rather than a regular repayment mode. So the first level of, shall we call, the shame factor, of really going and out and repaying, that may be withdrawn, even if it is done in a phased manner, basically.
Parekh, remember that when the Usha Thorat committee did submit their proposal, so everybody did say that it's going to be much stricter for NBFCs to really operate. But do you think now with the final guidelines that have come, it's a bit diluted? Do you think that the RBI has diluted the NBFC guidelines a bit?
They have diluted, and I'm glad they have diluted. The reason is very simple. You know, if we recognize that NBFCs have a role to play in the economy, and that is something that seems to be coming out of these guidelines, you know, that even with the fact that they use public funds, that is in some cases deposits and in other cases the banking funds, even if they use the public funding, yet, I mean, I would say, they have a role to play, and that is getting recognized in the new set of guidelines, and I'm really pleased with that, I should say.
Mr. Parekh, this is Faye D'Souza again. I just want to bring your notice again to the changed regulations on gold loans, the fact that the capital adequacy ratio is up to 12% there. And we know that gold or loans against gold is something that the RBI was a little uncomfortable with for a while. Do you think this increased CAR is enough? Does that, you know, personally for you as an analyst, does it give you a comfort level with these businesses now?
See, I mean, basically, there are two aspects associated with this particular, let's say, part of funding. One is at least it's secure to the extent that there is gold, I mean, underneath. That is, the underlying asset is the gold. And to that extent, the systemic issues are much less. They may crop up, though. The systemic issues can arise if we find that the value of gold, the underlying asset, on the basis of which the loans are offered, you know, they fall down so dramatically, in which case there could be a substantial amount of impact on the capital of such companies. In the present circumstance, it appears that this 12% norm is at least, I mean, compared to the 10% in case of other NBFCs, a much better recommendation. However, I'm clear in my mind that if the gold prices, that is the underlying asset value prices, go down dramatically, then RBI will have to re-examine this 12% factor as well.
One very quick question, Mr. Parekh. For tomorrow morning, for all of the NBFCs, you know, both in gold and otherwise, that are listed, how do you expect the stocks to react?
Well, I would say there shouldn't be too much of a react, and the simple reason is that, you know, there is a period given over which the implementation, it's a phased out kind of an implementation program. So, I mean, as I was explaining earlier as well, you know, in terms of capital adequacy, for example, the plowed back profits will really work for the NBFCs very well. I would say that top 4 or 5 NBFCs, to them, I suppose it would not certainly be as adverse. The first level of adverse impact was already discounted by the investors when Usha Thorat working group had come out with the recommendations. So, I mean, I would say it may not be as substantial as one feared it would be at one point in time.
All right, Mr. Parekh, many thanks for taking time out and speaking with us. ASHWIN Parek, they're joining us on the phone. And of course, Simran Gill, our reporter, who joined us to explain to us what those guidelines were about. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us on this show. Well, let's move on now to our top lead story on the national front. We'll come back to that in a little while. We have told we're time to take a really quick break. But when we come back, we'll talk about the Prime Minister's new cabinet. That's on the other side. Don't go anywhere.